We're on.
All right, let's do it.
Check, check. Number one. Let's go. All right. Welcome to what might be a complete disaster, but we'll see.
It could be, but we're just gonna roll with it and see what happens.
We're gonna
Could be
set the
magic.
we'll set the bar low to start with, and we'll lower expectations, and then we can build as we go. It works out well.
All
So
right.
go on.
Well,
Who are you? Who are you, and why are we here?
I'm Sydney, and the reason why Nick and I are here is so we can educate people on what a sports psychologist does, because there's not much out there to kind of tell people what we do. Every time I tell people what I do or what I study, they're always like, and what does that do? And they look at me with question marks, but also with so much interest. So hopefully we can kind of, I guess, share a bit about what we do, the different techniques, strategies, and how that might help not only an athlete, but the general population. So yeah, what do you reckon, Nick?
Well, even the other day, I had questions from two people saying, "Are you a sports psychologist yet? What is the difference between a performance psych and a sports psych?" So it's probably worth us at least starting there, I think, and we'll get some of that stuff out of the way. Do a bit of an intro to sports psychology as a profession, and then all the kind of nuances around like a mindset guru versus a psychologist versus a clinical psychologist, things like that. I think it's probably a good place to get the ball rolling.
I think so, because yeah, everyone's always like, okay, how is a sports psychologist different from a normal psychologist or a clinical psychologist? And it can get kind of confusing at the end of the day. So it'll be good to clear that up right now.
Well, let's start with how we'll talk just about Australia then, in the Australian context. So how do you become a psychologist in Australia?
Yeah, well, like the post we put up the other night, first you have to do 3 years of undergraduate degree, so Bachelor of Psychological Science. Then once you finish that, you want to get into either your honours or
postgraduate diploma. That's what I did. Yeah, it's equivalent fourth year program, but yeah, a little bit different.
And then after that, you have to apply for your Masters of Sports and Exercise Psychology, and that will take another 2 years to complete. Essentially, this whole time you're fighting for your life, I would say. Wouldn't you agree?
Yeah. It's yeah, you're sort of playing with fire a lot of the time. You're on edge of completely overdoing it and being burnt out from constantly thinking about psych and reading things about it, and yeah, it's full on. It's not easy.
Exactly. And to get into each of the courses, you have to get a certain mark. So I think to get into honours, it's around 65%.
It's high. It depends on the uni, but it's high. Like it's a decent benchmark. The unis that I applied for fourth year, my first time around, they had a minimum cutoff of 70. So, and it was hard because the first one that I applied for ended up with a 68. And so I just missed that cutoff. And they said, like, look, sorry, that's just too bad. You've missed the minimum benchmark. So yeah, back around I went. So it's a harsh thing. It depends on the uni too. Obviously, some of the unis are going to be, like someone like Melbourne Uni, who sort of pride themselves on the reputation and, that sort of stuff. Very old institution. So they've got very high standards for their students. Something like that is damn hard to get into, just like on its own. It's just sort of the nature of the beast, I think.
For sure. And like even me, like I got rejected everywhere first for honours. It was such a grind. And then after you do your honours year, you have to I think to get into masters, it's roughly 75 to 80.
Yeah, it's even harder
right?
again.
Or is it
I've heard roughly there's about this is approximate 200 applications per master's program for less than 20 spots at any of the master's programs in the country. But I've heard more than that. Yeah.
So when I applied, it was 600 that year.
for 20,
uni,
for
600
20 spots.
For 20 spots, yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, it was insane. It's so competitive. So for you to kind of get into masters, it's like a huge achievement, and you feel like you can finally relax once you get in. Well, that's what I thought anyway.
Until you get into the coursework.
yeah, it was not easy at all, especially first year. So,
But then sports psychology is
anyway,
even different again, because up until what, like a year, 2 years ago, the only program was in Queensland for sports psychology masters.
exactly.
That
So
was it. You had one choice.
people were moving up to Queensland, and now this is the course at ISN. And
Shout out to ISN.
shout out to ISN for taking us.
Bringing us the good stuff. Yeah.
Exactly. And so after masters, what happens?
Well, it sort of depends. Like if you want to get endorsed as a sports psychologist and earn the title of a sports psychologist, you've got to do, as far as I'm aware, it's between 12 and 24 months of extra supervised training with someone who has already been endorsed as a sports psychologist as well. So, and I've heard people get through that in sort of 9 months. I've heard people get through it in 12, 18. Just sort of depends how long it takes. But that to be an endorsed sports psychologist, it's a very, very lengthy pathway. So let's assume it's an absolute minimum of 7.5 years if you went from start to finish with no speed bumps, no delays, no anything. It's a long, long time.
It's a long time, but I guess also to be aware of, once you finish your masters, you can apply for general registration. So you call yourself a psychologist essentially.
Yeah. So Australia is a little bit different in that sense because we have the broad training program that allows you to then be a generally registered psychologist and work with populations within your scope of practice. Whereas countries like the UK, you specialize in certain areas. So if we were in the UK and I was a sports psychologist and you came to me and you had a clinical issue, ethically, I'm not allowed to see you. I have to refer you on to a clinical psych. Whereas Oz, we have a pretty good standard of clinical base level training to then qualify you as this generally registered practitioner, and then you kind of specialize after that. So it's a good system out here.
Yeah. And so what's the difference between calling yourself a performance psych and a general psych?
Well, this is one of the cheeky ways around it, is performance psychology is not a regulated term. So you don't have to be endorsed or go through certain programs. Obviously, you can't actually call yourself a psychologist in this country unless you are one. And anyone that's doing so should be correcting anyone who assumes that they are. Or if we get called the wrong title. So if someone calls me a sports psychologist, I have to explain to them, no, I'm not there yet. And there is a bit of a nuanced difference between performance and sport here. But performance, can call yourself that. There's a whole bunch of different words that people like to use to sort of appeal to a certain demographic or client group or organizations that will, essentially appeal to that cohort and not have to go through this sort of heavily regulated process. And
I guess also, I think you should touch on how you are already a psychologist. That would be a good place to start.
All right, let's do that. Yeah, we'll cycle back around. We'll do an intro.
Yeah.
So I am a registered psychologist, generally registered. Have been for about 2.5 years now. But the actual journey of study itself, I'm onto my 12th year of study in total. So, and there's still going to be another, because I'm planning on getting endorsed at the end of this. So, I've probably got another 18 months to 2 years on top of this as well. But it's a bit like law, where they talk about practicing law, or medicine, where it's like practicing medicine. You're practicing psychology as well. You're constantly learning and updating, and new research comes out, and you have to get on top of that too. So it's not like, oh, cool, we've been to uni for 6 years and full stop, that's it, off we go. There's constant learning and updating. So it is definitely a good part of it. But that's sort of where I'm at. I go with the title of performance psychologist at the moment because I'm allowed to. But I'm working towards that sports psychologist title. But I am now thinking that everybody should actually know a little bit more about you too. So where are you at with your journey? Fill us in.
Yeah, so I'm a provisional sports psychologist.
What does that mean?
So what does that mean? It means I am a psychologist in training. I'm doing my placements. So I'm doing my master's, obviously. And I have 1 semester left, just like Nick, but Nick's done a different course before this, and that's why he's registered already. So at the end of this year, or once I get all my hours done for placements, I can also apply for general registration.
Which takes about 6 weeks too for that paperwork to go through. So for anyone out there who's keen on registering soon, don't hold your breath on that getting processed very quickly, because there's a whole mountain of them that come through all at once when the university year finishes up. So the poor people at the ARPA registry office have a lot of work to do at certain points of the year.
Yeah, there's a lot of paperwork to do as well. So that's what I'm looking forward to. And it's not cheap.
Yeah. But it's all worth it. I must say it's all worth it. After having come out the other side, it's definitely worthwhile. So
you'd hope so if like this is like my 7th or 8th year studying. So yes, it's worth it. I can see the light at the end of the tunnel, and I'm super, super excited and super proud to have finally done this. So yeah, it's exciting. Exciting times ahead.
It definitely is. I was going to say we don't want to be all doom and gloom in the very first episode.
No,
at least
we'll save that for the second.
Yeah. Down the line somewhere, we'll start to bring some of that out. So
what are the differences between a sports psychologist and a clinical psychologist? What can we do that they can't, or what can't we touch that they can?
Very, very good question. Let's say, well, the first part is the difference between the clinical psychologist and a sports psych is, number one, training. So training and expertise. Mm-hmm. So clinical psychologists, as far as I'm aware, I don't want to speak on behalf of clinical psychologists. If there's any clin psychs out there or clin psych students out there, very happy to have them come on and tell us exactly what they do. But my understanding is very specialized. It's what I would consider the more hardcore issues within the general population. Personality disorders, really complex stuff that requires certain training and experience to be able to treat effectively. Whereas the sports psych realm, we're talking the more sort of, moderate up to moderately complex issues, I would say, in presentations, but more so strictly that how that then impacts performance or an athlete's, sort of day-to-day trainings, competition, all that sort of stuff. So,
and teams and coaches.
Yes, and teams and coaches. The dynamics can be tricky at times, shall we say? Mm-hmm. And navigating all of that is, part of what we can do too.
Yeah, definitely. Like if any athlete comes to us with bipolar or schizophrenia, personality disorders, PTSD, things that are really complex, we'd have to refer them on to a clinical psychologist for those certain issues. But yeah, so who do we work with?
As a sports psychologist?
As a sports psychologist.
Well, the sports psychologist will work with, as you mentioned previously, so teams, individuals, across all different sports. There does seem to be a bit of a growth in the organizational space now as well, where certain organizations are adopting the performance aspects that a sports psychologist is across, and then applying that to the broader organization or very specialized teams and things like that. So there is a little bit of that sort of crossover. So with organizational psychology being another avenue, another endorsed avenue in the space, something that we need to be careful of, that we don't cross over too much into other people's territory, thinking that we know, as much as them, or whether they think they know as much as us in our domains and things like that. So definitely something that we need to be aware of. Yeah, stay in our lane. Yeah. So something that I've noticed coming up over the last little while for sure.
Yeah, it's a pretty tricky environment to kind of navigate, because you're trying to decipher, especially in working with teams, you're trying to decide who your client is. So is that the coach, is that the athlete, or is it the team and organization? The different environments, so such as like a general psych or a clinical psych, they might be in a room, sitting across from their client, whereas we don't really have a place where we sit or where we're based. We're kind of with the team, we're where at the games, at the competitions, we might like grab them for a quick chat or go for a walk, and that kind of can be like a little session. So navigating those kind of different environments can be difficult, especially at the start, and then juggling confidentiality alongside that too. So yeah, there's a lot to it.
It was very informal, right? So, and I remember getting a bit of a shock with my first exposure to a team, where I'd come out of the private space where it was in a clinic room, you know, sort of like behind closed doors. It was all sort of hush hush in the shadows kind of thing. And then first exposure with a team, it was just, you're just out there in the open. People are coming up just randomly, just having a chat with you and things like that. And the first thing I thought of was, I wonder if other people are going to start to talk sort of amongst themselves, that people were coming up and talking to me. Oh, so-and-so's talking to Nick. That's, I wonder what's going on. That sort of thing. When like it might have just been a very friendly sort of intro chat. Whereas people make assumptions about that sort of stuff. It's a bit of a shock to the system when we're in that space. But it's so fun though. It's so cool just to be out there and get right amongst it.
Yeah, it's always different. It's so different. Like every time you go to work, it's something different. You just don't know what to expect. There's nothing conventional about it.
Yeah, it certainly gives you good variety. And it's nice to be in that team environment too, because I know from a private practice perspective, sitting in a room, yes, you're interacting with clients, but it can feel quite isolating and sort of lonely at times, because it's just you and the clients, and you haven't got a whole heap of people that you can chat with and, you have lunch with and whatever else, or go for a walk. So being in a team environment is so good, just to kind of like almost decompress, like before the pressure gets too much. It's definitely a perk.
Definitely. And so I guess moving on to like what we kind of do. So the different domains the sports psychologist kind of deals with.
Yeah.
There's a lot.
How much time have we got?
We can touch on, I don't know, not much, but we can touch on like a few, I guess, like goal setting. We do a lot of that.
Yeah, well, let's go over the psychological skills canon. So for listeners who are unsure, it's made up of 5 different categories that we see commonly in sports psych. So goal setting, imagery, concentration, self-talk, and relaxation. I got them all. Good. These are just some of the things that we can work on with athletes or other performers for that matter, on an individual level, but more a broader group and team level as well. So the thing that we have, this is where psychologists are different from, like a mental skills coach or someone who classifies himself as, like a life coach or whatever, is that just using those examples of those 5 areas, there are massive, massive bodies of research behind those, suggesting what works and what doesn't, what the best approach is, what does nothing, what to avoid, all these types of things. We follow best evidence, so best practice. So if the evidence suggests, for relaxation, it might be like progressive muscle relaxation is a really good technique to use to lower performance anxiety. Okay, great. The research would support that, and we can say, yep, awesome. We can use this because there's evidence behind it. So that's sort of to give you a little bit of an idea of some of the things that we can do. The list is massive. Like if we went through the whole list, it'd be pretty boring, I would say, in one go. So maybe we'll unpack the entire list over a series of about 50 or 60 podcasts. How's that sound?
Yeah, I think so. I think like breaking each one of them down would be super helpful. And the different like issues, I guess, people might face, or athletes, such as performance anxiety, and then how we would kind of tackle that with them too. So we have lots and lots to like discuss over the next however long. I'm kind of excited to get into it and educate people on what we do and how and everything we talk about, like even the general population can use. I just want to make that clear.
Yeah, we're all performers in our own way and in our own space. So yeah, hopefully some of the stuff we talk about is interesting and yeah, you can all take something away and apply it to your everyday life for sure.
And I'm hoping to like discuss a whole range of topics as well that, either in the media or extreme sports, who
Well, yeah, my
knows?
favorite.
But I don't know, same. But if there's anything else like people want us to discuss or they want to know more of, like, please let us know. We'll definitely cover it. But yeah, it's going to be fun.
Number one, out of the way, done. How good. Thanks for tuning in.
That's amazing. Stay tuned for the next.
Peace out.